Richard Sandor was very much involved in the whole lead up to the sulfur and implementation of the sulfur dioxide markets that were implemented in the United States under the Clean Air Act in 1992 by George Bush Sr., which led to a very highly commoditized and successful approach to addressing the sulfur dioxide emissions in the United States. The use of the markets to go towards compliance of meeting those objectives. Just to get into a little bit of numbers, and I hope you'll excuse me. And when the Clean Air Act was implemented and the sulfur dioxide trading system was announced, the regulators said it would probably cost $1,200 US per ton in order to meet these objectives. And so it's $1,200 US per ton is what we think it's going to cost, the best available control costs. But we're also going to allow companies to engage in emissions trading. But if they don't actually meet their requirements at the end of the year, they're going to be penalized by 3 times what it would cost them to meet the requirements, but they're also going to have to replace that ton that they were out of compliance. So significant sort of carrot. So they allowed emissions trading to be part of the Clean Air Act. So that was the carrot. The stick was, if you don't meet that, you're going to have a 3-to-1 penalty, plus you still have to replace that ton that you're out of compliance. The allowance markets in the United States, if I remember correctly, in the first day of trading, the allowance markets transacted at about $132 US per ton. So versus $1,200, which is what the best available control technology said it would cost to reduce these emissions. So the companies that were regulated under these markets were able to innovate and look at innovative ways in which to address these problems, and then were able to transact in the allowance markets in order to buy and or sell their compliance units. So a perfect example of how allowing the markets to work, setting a policy, setting a regulation, and allowing the markets to work and backing it up with a compliance penalty spurs innovation. If you set a target, to some extent, you let business get on with doing what they're good at and addressing these issues through the use of technologies and tools and markets that they're used to. This is what happens. But established in 2004, there were over 400 members. They all took on voluntary commitments. I think they all took on voluntary commitments of 6%. They really worked together to demonstrate the viability of the voluntary-based carbon credit market in terms of addressing greenhouse gas issues. It really developed a lot of momentum. The theory was, though, that there was going to be a compliance regime that would develop in the United States over time. So a lot of these progressive companies came together to really establish momentum, to demonstrate commitment, to increase their experience, to take early action, and to contribute to the development of good policy around that. However, in 2010, I think there was a US climate bill that failed, and a lot of the momentum for that initiative was lost. The Chicago Climate Exchange was eventually sold. Same thing happened in Canada. We had a very robust voluntary carbon credit market in the 1990s, with the anticipation of the early actors and progressive companies coming together to learn, to undertake transactions, to really get the knowledge that's necessary in order to be able to address using the carbon markets as part of a compliance tool over the longer term. But there was a lot of activity, and then as policy uncertainty grew, that sort of reduced. But a lot of these voluntary activities that were undertaken by real forward thinkers like Richard Sandor, and then real forward thinking companies like Ontario Hydro and many others, and then the firm that I worked for from 2000 to 2009, Cantor Fitzgerald, was a huge leader in this space. We were developing the carbon market brokerage infrastructure to facilitate a global carbon market, because our founder felt that that this was significant and very important, and we needed to address climate change. And what better way by using markets and the concept behind markets to address, in part, environmental objectives. In today's landscape, we have a couple of things happening. We talked a lot about the markets of the past, the voluntary carbon markets, and then the international markets under Kyoto, and then some of the state initiatives and some of the provincial initiatives, some of which were compliance focused, some which are voluntary focused. They were all being undertaken because there was a vision around that, right? There was a vision that we can use markets to help us achieve our environmental objectives. Throughout all of those periods, from the 1990s, up to the mid to the late 2000s, there were a couple elements that were totally missing from this market. I think that today, the carbon markets and the voluntary carbon market and the compliance markets and their potential to contribute, vis-a-vis whether or not the political will exists, the potential is amazing. And that there's a couple of real key reasons for that. One is that companies and countries have really taken on net zero commitments. There is a need right now to demonstrate that those are real. And some, so there's a lot of discussion around ESG greenwashing and all that sort of stuff. And that's necessary as markets evolve, these sorts of oversight bodies and it's all necessary to look into this. But the thing that was different now than then is we can see the damage that's happening as a result of climate change. We couldn't, we had this amazing international organization, the International Panel on Climate Change, and they for decades, many of those 450 scientists have been looking into, global warming and have been saying it's happening, and these are going to be the impacts, and these will be the damages, and they were saying this is what could happen, but we can actually see the damage now. That's one of the things that has changed. We can see the impacts, from severe weather, from floods, from droughts, from forest fires, from changing temperature. We can actually see that in the United States and Canada and the rest of the world, in the low island states. We can see what happens as a result of climate change. We can actually monetize it. The insurance industry has taken a huge, has really been able to, you can put a monetary value on damage if you have to actually replace something. The other thing that's different is that the financial industry is heavily involved. The pension funds, the equity funds, and the activists are also involved. The climate activists are taking board positions from companies that are not addressing climate change, along with the other expertise that exists in the market for brokers and traders and exchanges like us that are developing, and climate scientists and all of these things are coming together. And then the other layer that's over top of that is the regulatory bodies are getting heavily involved. The SEC is looking at climate disclosure. The EU has a law for climate disclosure. The International Organization of Securities Commissions is looking into the voluntary carbon markets and the compliance markets. Countries are establishing requirements for reporting. The Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosure, has set guidelines. The International Sustainability Standards Boards is issuing their requirements, and it goes into force in 2024. The SEC is issuing its report in June, and it enters into force in 2000. None of these things were there in the early voluntary markets, and I personally see this as evolution of the carbon market towards what we're talking about is the role at AirCarbon Exchange. What we want to do is have the types of the carbon market mirror the financial markets, and this regulatory oversight, and a lot of this and the role of the financial sector and pension funds and private equity funds, making sure that their investees are addressing climate change and are doing what they're saying they're doing on net zero. These are all extremely important elements in that. And with the vision of our founders at AirCarbon and the rest of the team that works at AirCarbon, this is what we want to see. We want, we're very active in the voluntary market now. We will move, there's going to be a convergence of the voluntary and the compliance markets over time as we all move towards net zero. And, all of these elements will help us to move towards the type of markets we need to have, which are transparent, efficient, highly liquid, commoditized, with some regulatory oversight. And AirCarbon itself has taken a leadership role in becoming the world's first fully regulated AirCarbon Exchange, because we see that that's important. We see that that is really needed as we evolve towards addressing climate change successfully through the use of the voluntary carbon markets or the compliance markets as one of the tools. There's so many other actors involved now that really, we're seeing a convergence around the fact that in order to have successful carbon markets, we need to demonstrate that carbon credits are real, that they're high quality, and so they're and that they can be transacted and they can be delivered, and the guarantees can be standardized, and trading over smart contracts and using the blockchain for a pure historical ledger of transaction enables you to trace carbon credits, enables you to get rid of some of the issues around double counting and what have you. So, we're really seeing an evolution towards, which will enable us to move towards highly liquid markets. Again, if we get it right, and as we ensure that we continue moving up this quality scale, we all have a common goal of wanting this to work. And, and so I highly believe it will work. It has a real chance of succeeding. We can really use the markets to address climate. And, again, a number of people have said, including my former boss, Carlton Bartels, said, that this could be one of the largest commodity markets in the world and could be its own asset class. And with the players such as the co-founders of AirCarbon, Bill Pazos and Tom Mahone, and with others, all our competitors, the registries, the associations, the regulators, we all work together to make it happen, and we'll be successful, and we'll get to address some of the issues associated with climate change, and show that innovation can be achieved, and get the financing towards these needs, and that's the goal, is getting to net zero. So if we work together at it and we use the markets for good, we can do that, and we will.